Welcome back to Major Antonio's presentation of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria by Winston S. Churchill. Today, 125 years ago, the future Prime Minister reported from the fronts of the Boer War in South Africa. We shall follow his footsteps as he narrates his adventures himself. Subscribe to our channel so as not to miss anything. Chapter 17, The Battle of Spion Kop. Ventersproot, January 25, 1900.
It is the remarkable characteristic of strong races, as of honorable men, to keep their tempers in the face of disappointment, and never to lose a just sense of proportion. And it is, moreover, the duty of every citizen in times of trouble to do or say or even to think nothing that can weaken or discourage the energies of the state. Sir Redvers Buller's army has met with another serious check in the attempt to relieve Ladysmith. We have approached, tested, and assailed the Boer positions beyond the Tugela, fighting more or less continuously for 5 days, and the result is that we find they cannot be pierced from the direction of Trichart's Drift any more than at Colenso. With the loss of more than 2,000 men out of a small army, we find it necessary to recross the river and seek for some other line of attack. And meanwhile the long and brave resistance of Ladysmith must be drawing to a close. Indeed, it is the opinion of many good judges that further efforts to relieve the town will only be attended with further loss. As to this, I do not pronounce, but I am certain of one thing, that further efforts must be made, without regard to the loss of life which will attend them. I have seen and heard a good deal of what has passed here. I have often been blamed for the freedom with which I have written of other operations and criticized their commanders. I respectfully submit that I am as venomous an amateur strategist as exists at this time. It is very easy, and much more easy than profitable, when freed from all responsibility, to make daring suggestions and express decided opinions. I assert that I would not hesitate to criticize mercilessly if I was not myself sobered by the full appreciation of the extraordinary difficulties which the relief of Ladysmith presents. And if there be anyone who has any confidence in my desire to write the truth, I appeal to him to be patient and calm, to recognize that perhaps the task before Sir Redvers Buller and his subordinates is an actual impossibility, that if these generals are not capable men, among the best that our times produce, it is difficult to know where and how others may be obtained, and finally to brutally face the fact that Sir George White and his heroic garrison may be forced to become the prisoners of the Boers, remembering always that nothing that happens, either victory or defeat, in northern Natal can affect the ultimate result of the war. In a word, let no one despair of the empire, because a few thousand soldiers are killed, wounded, or captured. Now for the story as plainly and briefly as possible. When Buller had arrived at Potgieter's, he found himself confronted by a horseshoe position of great strength, enclosing and closing the debouches from the ford where he had secured a practical bridgehead. He therefore masked Potgieter's with 7 battalions and 24 guns, and sent Warren with 12 battalions and 36 guns to turn the right, which rested on the lofty hill, almost mountain, of Spion Kop. The Boers, to meet this turning movement, extended their line westwards along the heights of the Tugela Valley, almost as far as Acton Holmes. Their whole position was, therefore, shaped like a note of interrogation laid on its side, the curve in front of General Littleton, the straight line before Sir Charles Warren. At the angle formed by the junction of the curve and the line stands Spion Kop, Lookout Hill. The curved position in front of General Littleton has been already described in a previous letter. The straight position in front of Sir Charles Warren ran in 2 lines along the edge and crest of a plateau which rises steeply 2 miles from the river, but is approachable by numerous long arates and dongas. These letters have completed the chronicle down to the evening of the 18th, when the successful cavalry action was fought on the extreme left. I do not know why nothing was done on the 19th, but it does not appear that anything was lost by the delay. The enemy's entrenchments were already complete, and neither his numbers nor the strength of his positions could increase. On the 20th, Warren, having crept up the arates and dongas, began his attack. The brigades of Generals Woodgate and Hart pushed forward on the right, and the Lancashire and Irish regiments, fighting with the usual gallantry of Her Majesty's troops, succeeded, in spite of a heavy fire of rifles and artillery, in effecting lodgments at various points along the edge of the plateau, capturing some portions of the enemy's first line of entrenchments. On the extreme left, the cavalry under Lord Dundonald demonstrated effectively, and the South African light horse under Colonel Byng actually took and held without artillery support of any kind a high hill called henceforward Bastion Hill between the Dutch right and center. Major Childe, the officer whose squadron performed this daring exploit, was killed on the summit by the shell fire to which the successful assailants were subjected by the Boers. In the evening, infantry reinforcements of Hildyard's brigade arrived, and at dawn, the cavalry handed over the hill to their charge. The losses during the day did not exceed 350 officers and men wounded, with fortunately a small proportion of killed, and fell mainly on the Lancashire Fusiliers, the Dublin Fusiliers, always in the front, and the Royal Lancaster Regiment. They were not disproportioned to the apparent advantage gained. On the 21st, the action was renewed. Hart's and Woodgate's brigades on the right made good and extended their lodgments, capturing all the Boer trenches of their first defensive line along the edge of the plateau. To the east of Bastion Hill, there runs a deep reentrant, which appeared to open a cleft between the right and center of the Boer position. The tendency of General Hildyard's action, with 5 battalions and 2 batteries, on the British left this day was to drive a wedge of infantry into this cleft, and so split the Boer position in 2. But as the action developed, the great strength of the second line of defense gradually revealed itself. It ran along the crest of the plateau, which rises about 1,000 yards from the edge in a series of beautiful smooth grassy slopes of concave surface, forming veritable glacis for the musketry of the defense to sweep. And it consisted of a line of low rock and earth redoubts and shelter trenches, apparently provided with overhead cover, and cleverly arranged to command all approaches with fire, often with crossfire, sometimes with converging fire. Throughout the 21st, as during the 20th, the British artillery, consisting of 6 field batteries and 4 howitzers, the latter apparently of tremendous power, bombarded the whole Boer position ceaselessly, firing on each occasion nearly 3,000 shells. They claimed to have inflicted considerable loss on the enemy, and must have inflicted some, but failed utterly and painfully to silence the musketry, to clear the trenches, or reach and overpower the Dutch artillery, which did not number more than 7 or 8 guns and 2 Maxim shell guns, but which were better served and maneuvered and of superior quality. The losses in the action of the 20th were about 130 officers and men killed and wounded, but this must be regarded as severe in the face of the fact that no serious collision or even contact took place. During the 22nd and 23rd, the troops held the positions they had won, and the infantry were subjected to a harassing shell fire from the Boer guns, which, playing from either flank, searched the re-entrance in which the battalions sheltered, and which, though they did not cause a greater loss than 40 men on the 22nd and 25 on the 23rd, nevertheless made their position extremely uncomfortable. It was quite evident that the troops could not be fairly required to endure this bombardment, against which there was no protection indefinitely. Nor was any good object, but rather the contrary, to be gained by waiting. 3 alternatives presented themselves to the Council of War held on the 22nd. First, to attack the second Boer position frontally along the crest by moonlight. This would involve a great slaughter and a terrible risk. Secondly, to withdraw again beyond the Tugela and look elsewhere for a passage, a moral defeat and a further delay in the relief of Ladysmith. And thirdly, to attack by night the mountain of Spion Kop, and thence to enfilade and command the Boer entrenchments. Sir Redvers Buller, who has always disdained effect, was for the second course, unpalatable as it must have been to a fearless man, miserable as it is to call off infantry after they have made sacrifices and won positions, and to call them off a second time. The discussion was an informal one, and no votes were taken, but the general yielded to the advice of his subordinate, rightly, I hold, Because now, at least we know the strength of the enemy's position, whereas before we only dreaded it, and knowledge is a better reason for action than apprehension. It was therefore decided to attack Spion Kop by night, rush the Boer trenches with the bayonet, entrench as far as possible before dawn, hold on during the day, drag guns up at night, and thus dominate the Boer lines. There is, of course, no possible doubt that Spion Kop is the key of the whole position, and the reader has only to think of the horizontal note of interrogation, and remember that the mountain at the angle divides, commands, and enfilades the enemy's lines, to appreciate this fact. The questions to be proved were whether the troops could hold out during the day, and whether the place could be converted into a fort proof against shell fire and armed with guns during the following night. Fate has now decided both. General Woodgate was entrusted with the command, and Colonel Thornycroft with much of the arrangement and direction of the night attack. It does not seem that anything but good resulted from this too soon broken cooperation. Thornycroft declined to attack on the night of the 22nd because the ground had not been reconnoitered, and he wanted to be sure of his way. The infantry therefore had another day's shelling on the 23rd. Good reconnaissances were, however, made. Littleton was strengthened by 2 Fusilier battalions from Shively. Warren was reinforced by Talbot Coke's brigade and the Imperial Light Infantry, and at 1 o'clock on the morning of January 24th, General Woodgate started from his camp with the Lancashire Fusiliers, the Royal Lancaster Regiment, 2 companies of the South Lancashires, and Thornycroft's mounted infantry. Guided by Colonel Thornycroft, the force made its way successfully up the southern spur of the mountain, over most difficult and dangerous ground, and surprised the Boers guarding the entrenchments on the summit. At 3 o'clock, those listening in the plain heard the sudden outburst of musketry, followed by the loud cheers of the troops, and knew that the position had been carried. 10 soldiers were killed and wounded in the firing. 6 Boers perished by the bayonet. The force then proceeded to fortify itself, but the surface of the hill was extremely unsuited to defense. The rocks which covered the summit made digging an impossibility and were themselves mostly too large to be built into sangars. Such cover, however, as had been made by the Boers was utilized and improved. Morning broke, and with it the attack. The enemy, realizing the vital importance of the position, concentrated every man and gun at his disposal for its recapture. A fierce and furious shell fire was opened forthwith on the summit, causing immediate and continual loss. General Woodgate was wounded, and the command devolved on a regimental officer, who, at 6:30, applied for reinforcements in a letter which scarcely displayed that composure and determination necessary in such a bloody debate. Sir Redvers Buller then took the extreme step of appointing Major Thornycroft, already only a local lieutenant colonel, local brigadier general, commanding on the summit of Spion Kop. The Imperial Light Infantry, the Middlesex Regiment, and a little later the Somersets, from General Talbot Coke's brigade, were ordered to reinforce the defense. But General Coke was directed to remain below the summit of the hill, so that the fight might still be conducted by the best fighting man. The Boers followed, and accompanied their shells by a vigorous rifle attack on the hill, and about 8:30 the position became most critical. The troops were driven almost entirely off the main plateau, and the Boers succeeded in reoccupying some of their trenches. A frightful disaster was narrowly averted. About 20 men in one of the captured trenches abandoned their resistance, threw up their hands, and called out that they would surrender. Colonel Thornycroft, whose great stature made him everywhere conspicuous, and who was from dawn till dusk in the first firing line, rushed to the spot. The Boers advancing to take the prisoners, as at Nicholson's Neck, were scarcely 30 yards away. Thornycroft shouted to the Boer leader, "You may go to hell. I command on this hill and allow no surrender. Go on with your firing," which latter they did with terrible effect, killing many. The survivors, with the rest of the firing line, fled 200 yards, were rallied by their indomitable commander, and being reinforced by 2 brave companies of the Middlesex Regiment, charged back, recovering all lost ground, and the position was maintained until nightfall. No words in these days of extravagant expression can do justice to the glorious endurance which the English regiments, for they were all English, displayed throughout the long, dragging hours of hellfire. Between 3 and 4 o'clock, the shells were falling on the hill from both sides, as I counted, at the rate of 7 a minute, and the strange discharges of the Maxim shell guns, the pom-poms, as these terrible engines are called for want of a correct name, lacerated the hillsides with dotted chains of smoke and dust. A thick and continual stream of wounded flowed rearwards. A village of ambulance wagons grew up at the foot of the mountain. The dead and injured, smashed and broken by the shells, littered the summit till it was a bloody, reeking shambles. Thirst tormented the soldiers, for though water was at hand, the fight was too close and furious to give even a moment's breathing space. But nothing could weaken the stubborn vigor of the defense. The Dorset Regiment, the last of Talbot Coke's brigade, was ordered to support the struggling troops. The gallant Littleton, of his own accord, sent the Scottish Rifles and the 3rd King's Royal Rifles from Potgieters to aid them. But though their splendid attack did not help the main action, though the British artillery, unable to find or reach the enemy's guns, could only tear up the ground in impotent fury, though the shell fire and rifle fire never ceased for an instant, the magnificent infantry maintained the defense, and night closed in with the British still in possession of the hill. I find it convenient, and perhaps the reader will allow me, to break into a more personal account of what followed. It drove us all mad to watch idly in camp the horrible shelling that was directed on the captured position, and at about 4 o'clock I rode with Captain R. Brooke, 7th Hussars, to Spion Kop to find out what the true situation was. We passed through the ambulance village, and leaving our horses climbed up the spur. Streams of wounded met us and obstructed the path. Men were staggering along alone, or supported by comrades, or crawling on hands and knees, or carried on stretchers. Corpses lay here and there. Many of the wounds were of a horrible nature. The splinters and fragments of the shell had torn and mutilated in the most ghastly manner. I passed about 200 while I was climbing up. There was, moreover, a small but steady leakage of unwounded men of all corps. Some of these cursed and swore. Others were utterly exhausted and fell on the hillside in stupor. Others again seemed drunk, though they had had no liquor. Scores were sleeping heavily. Fighting was still proceeding, and stray bullets struck all over the ground, while the Maxim shell guns scourged the flanks of the hill and the sheltering infantry at regular intervals of a minute. The 3rd King's Royal Rifles were out of reach. The Dorset Regiment was the only battalion not thrown into the fight and intact as an effective unit. I had seen some service, and Captain Brooke has been through more fighting than any other officer of late years. We were so profoundly impressed by the spectacle and situation that we resolved to go and tell Sir Charles Warren what we had seen. The fight had been so close that no proper reports had been sent to the general, so he listened with great patience and attention. One thing was quite clear: unless good and efficient cover could be made during the night, and unless guns could be dragged to the summit of the hill to match the Boer artillery, the infantry could not, perhaps would not, endure another day. The human machine will not stand certain strains for long. The questions were, could guns be brought up the hill, and if so, could the troops maintain themselves? The artillery officers had examined the track. They said no, and that even if they could reach the top of the hill, they would only be shot out of action. 2 long-range naval 12-pounders, much heavier than the field guns, had arrived. The naval lieutenant in charge said he could go anywhere, or would have a try anyway. He was quite sure that if he could get on the top of the hill, he would knock out the Boer guns, or be knocked out by them, and that was what he wanted to find out. I do not believe that the attempt would have succeeded, or that the guns could have been in position by daylight, but the contrast in spirit was very refreshing. Another informal council of war was called. Sir Charles Warren wanted to know Colonel Thornycroft's views. I was sent to obtain them. The darkness was intense, the track stony and uneven. It was hopelessly congested with ambulances, stragglers, and wounded men. I soon had to leave my horse, and then toiled upwards, finding everywhere streams of men winding about the almost precipitous sides of the mountain and an intermittent crackle of musketry at the top. Only one solid battalion remained, the Dorsets. All the others were intermingled. Officers had collected little parties, companies, and half-companies. Here and there larger bodies had formed, but there was no possibility in the darkness of gripping anybody or anything. Yet it must not be imagined that the infantry were demoralized. Stragglers and weaklings there were in plenty, but the mass of the soldiers were determined men. One man I found dragging down a box of ammunition quite by himself. "To do something," he said. A sergeant with 20 men formed up was inquiring what troops were to hold the position. Regimental officers everywhere cool and cheery, each with a little group of men around him, all full of fight and energy. But the darkness and the broken ground paralyzed everyone. I found Colonel Thornycroft at the top of the mountain. Everyone seemed to know, even in the confusion, where he was. He was sitting on the ground, surrounded by the remnants of the regiment he had raised, who had fought for him like lions and followed him like dogs. I explained the situation as I had been told and as I thought. Naval guns were prepared to try. Sappers and working parties were already on the road with thousands of sandbags. What did he think? But the decision had already been taken. He had never received any messages from the general, had not had time to write any. Messages had been sent him. He had wanted to send others himself. The fight had been too hot, too close, too interlaced for him to attend to anything, but to support this company, clear those rocks, or line that trench. So, having heard nothing and expecting no guns, he had decided to retire. As he put it tersely, better 6 good battalions safely down the hill than a mop-up in the morning. Then we came home, drawing down our rearguard after us very slowly and carefully, and as the ground grew more level, the regiments began to form again into their old solid blocks. Such was the 5th of the series of actions called the Battle of Spion Kop. It is an event which the British people may regard with feelings of equal pride and sadness. It redounds to the honor of the soldiers, though not greatly to that of the generals. But when all that will be written about this has been written, and all the bitter words have been said by the people who never do anything themselves, the wise and just citizen will remember that these same generals are, after all, brave, capable, noble English gentlemen, trying their best to carry through a task which may prove to be impossible, and is certainly the hardest ever set to men. The Lancashire Fusiliers, the Imperial Light Infantry, whose baptism of fire it was, Thornycroft's, and the Middlesex Regiment sustained the greater part of the losses. We will have another try, and if it pleases God, do better next time.
Chapter 18, Through the 5 Days Action. Venters Sprout, January 25, 1900.
The importance of giving a general and comprehensive account of the late actions around and on Spion Kop prevented me from describing its scenes and incidents. Events, like gentlemen at a levee, in these exciting days tread so closely on each other's heels that many pass unnoticed, and most can only claim the scantiest attention. But I will pick from the hurrying procession a few, distinguished for no other reason than that they have caught my eye, and from their quality the reader may judge of the rest. The morning of the 20th discovered the cavalry still encamped behind the hills near the Acton-Holmes road, on which they had surprised the Boers 2 days before. The loud and repeated discharge of the artillery advised us that the long-expected general action had begun. What part were the cavalry to play? No orders had been sent to Lord Dundonald, except that he was to cover the left flank of the infantry. But the cavalry commander, no less than his brigade, proposed to interpret these instructions freely. Accordingly, at about 9:30, the South African Light Horse, 2 squadrons of the 13th Hussars, and a battery of 4 machine guns moved forward towards the line of heights along the edge and crest of which ran the Boer position with the intention of demonstrating against them, and the daring idea, somewhere in the background, of attacking and seizing one prominent feature which jutted out into the plain, and which, from its boldness and shape, we had christened Bastion Hill. The composite regiment, who watched the extreme left, were directed to support us if all was clear in their front at 1 o'clock, and Thornycroft's mounted infantry, who kept touch between the main cavalry force and the infantry left flank, had similar orders to cooperate. At 10 o'clock, Lord Dundonald ordered the South African Light Horse to advance against Bastion Hill. If the resistance was severe, they were not to press the attack, but to content themselves with a musketry demonstration. If, however, they found it convenient to get on, they were to do so as far as they liked. Colonel Byng thereon sent 2 squadrons under Major Child to advance, dismounted frontally on the hill, and proposed to cover their movements by the fire of the other 2 squadrons, who were to gallop to the shelter of a wood and creep thence up the various dongas to within effective range. Major Child accepted his orders with alacrity and started forth on what seemed, as I watched from a grassy ridge, a most desperate enterprise. The dark brown mass of Bastion Hill appeared to dominate the plain. On its crest, the figures of the Boers could be seen frequently moving about. Other spurs to either flanks looked as if they afforded facilities for crossfire. And to capture this formidable position, we could dismount only about 150 men, and had, moreover, no artillery support of any kind. Yet as one examined the hill, it became evident that its strength was apparent rather than real. Its slopes were so steep that they presented no good field of fire. Its crest was a convex curve, over and down, which the defenders must advance before they could command the approaches, and when so advanced, they would be exposed without shelter of any kind to the fire of the covering troops. The salient was so prominent and jutted out so far from the general line of hills, and was besides shaped so like a blunted redden, that its front face was secure from flanking fire. In fact, there was plenty of dead ground in its approaches, and moreover, dongas, which are the same as nullahs in India or gullies in Australia, ran agreeably to our wishes towards the hill in all directions. When first we had seen the hill 3 days before, we had selected it as a weak point in the Dutch line. It afterwards proved that the Boers had no illusions as to its strength and had made their arrangements accordingly. So soon as the dismounted squadrons had begun their advance, Colonel Byng led the 2 who were to cover it forward. The wood we were to reach and find shelter in was about 1,000 yards distant, and had been reported unoccupied by the Boers, who indeed confined themselves strictly to the hills after their rough handling on the 18th by the cavalry. We moved off at a walk, spreading into a wide open order, as wise colonial cavalry always do. And it was fortunate that our formation was a dispersed one, for no sooner had we moved into the open ground than there was the flash of a gun far away among the hills to the westward. I had had some experience of artillery fire in the armored train episode, but there the guns were firing at such close quarters that the report of the discharge and the explosion of the shell were almost simultaneous. Nor had I ever heard the menacing hissing roar which heralds the approach of a long-range projectile. It came swiftly, passed overhead with a sound like the rending of thin sheets of iron, and burst with a rather dull explosion in the ground 100 yards behind the squadrons, throwing up smoke and clods of earth. We broke into a gallop and moved in curving course towards the wood. I suppose we were a target 100 yards broad by 150 deep. The range was not less than 7,000 yards, and we were at the gallop. Think of this, Inspector General of Artillery. The Boer gunners fired 10 or 11 shells, every one of which fell among or within 100 yards of our ranks. Between us and the wood ran a deep donga with a river only fordable in places flowing through it. Some confusion occurred in crossing this, but at last the whole regiment was across and found shelter from the terrible gun. Perhaps there were 2 on the further bank. Thanks to our dispersed formation, only 2 horses had been killed, and it was possible to admire, without having to deplore the skill of the artillerists who could make such beautiful practice at such a range. Colonel Byng thought it advisable to leave the horses in the cover of the protecting riverbank, and we therefore pushed on, dismounted, and, straggling through the high maize crop without presenting any target to the guns, reached the wood safely. Through this, we hurried as far as its further edge. Here, the riflemen on the hill opened with long-range fire. It was only 100 yards into the donga, and the troopers immediately began running across in 2s and 3s. In the irregular corps, All appearances are sacrificed to the main object of getting where you want to without being hurt. No one was hurt. Colonel Byng made his way along the donga to within about 12 or 1400 yards, and from excellent cover opened fire on the Boers holding the summit of the hill. A long musketry duel ensued without any loss to our side, and with probably no more to the enemy. The colonial troopers, as wary as the Dutch, showed very little to shoot at, so that, though there were plenty of bullets, there was no bloodshed. Regular infantry would probably have lost 30 or 40 men. I went back for machine guns, and about half an hour later they were brought into action at the edge of the wood. Boers on the skyline at 2,000 yards, tat, 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 half a dozen times repeated, Boers galloping to cover. One, yes, by Jupiter. One on his back on the grass. After that, no more targets to shoot at. Continuous searching of the skyline, however, on the chance of killing someone, and in any case, to support the frontal attack. We had altogether 3 guns. The 13th Hussars Maxim under Lieutenant Clutterbuck, detached from the 4th Hussars, one of Lord Dundonald's battery of Colts under Mr. Hill, who is a member of Parliament and guides the majestic course of empire besides managing machine guns, and our own Maxim, all under Major Villiers. These 3 machines set up a most exhilarating splutter, flaring and crackling all along the edge of the wood, and even attracted the attention of the Boers. All of a sudden, there was a furious rush and roar overhead. 2 or 3 little casuarina trees and a shower of branches fell to the ground. What on earth could this be? The main action was crashing away on the right. Evidently a shell had passed a few feet over our heads, but was it from our guns shelling the hills in front, or from the enemy? In another minute the question was answered by another shell. It was our old friend the gun to the westward, who, irritated by the noisy Maxims, had resolved to put his foot down. Whids! Bang! Came a third shot, exploding among the branches just behind the Colt gun, to the great delight of Mr. Hill, who secured a large fragment, which I have advised him to lay on the table in the smoking room of the house for the gratification, instruction, and diversion of other honorable members. The next shell smashed through the roof of a farmhouse which stood at the corner of the wood, and near which 2 troops of the 13th Hussars, who were escorting the Maxims and watching the flanks, had left their led horses. The next, in quick succession, fell right among them, killing one, but luckily, very luckily, failed to burst. The officer then decided to move the horses to a safer place. The 2 troops mounted and galloped off. They were a tiny target, only a moving speck across the plain, but the Boer gunners threw a shell within a yard of the first troop leader. All this at 7,000 yards. English artillery experts, please note, and if possible copy. While these things were passing, the advancing squadrons had begun to climb the hill, and found to their astonishment that they were scarcely fired at. It was of great importance, however, that the Boers should be cleared from the summit by the Maxim fire. And lest this should be diverted on our own men by mistake, I left the wood for the purpose of signaling back how far the advance had proceeded and up to what point the guns could safely fire. The ground was broken, the distance considerable. Before I reached the hill, the situation had changed. The enemy's artillery had persuaded the Maxims that they would do better to be quiet, at any rate until they could see something to shoot at. Major Childay had reached the top of the hill, one man of his squadron, 10 minutes in front of anyone else, waving his hat on his rifle at the summit to the admiration of thousands of the infantry, all of whom saw this act of conspicuous recklessness and rejoiced. Lord Dundonald had galloped up to support the attack with Thornycroft's mounted infantry and the rest of the 13th Hussars. We, the South African Light Horse, had taken Bastion Hill. To advance further forward, however, proved quite impossible. The Boers had withdrawn to a second position 1,000 yards in rear of the top of the hill. From this they directed a most accurate and damnable fire on all who showed themselves on the plateau. Beneath the crest, one sat in safety and listened to the swish of bullets passing overhead. Above, the men were content to lie quite still underneath the rocks and wait for darkness. I had a message for Major Child, and found him sitting on this dangerous ground, partly sheltered by a large rock, a serene old gentleman, exhausted with his climb, justly proud of its brilliant success. I found no reason to remain very long on the plateau and had just returned to the brigadier when the Boer guns began to shell the tip of the hill. The first 2 or 3 projectiles skimmed over the surface and roared harmlessly away. But the Boers were not long in striking their mark. 2 percussion shells burst on the exposed side of the hill, and then a well-exploded shrapnel searched its summit, searched and found what it sought. Major Childe was instantly killed by a fragment that entered his brain, and half a dozen troopers were more or less seriously wounded. After that, as if satisfied, the enemy's gun turned its attention elsewhere. I think this death of Major Childe was a very sad event even among the inevitable incidents of war. He had served many years ago in the Blues, and since then a connection with the turf had made him not unknown and well-liked in sporting circles. Old and gray as he was, the call to arms had drawn him from home and wife and comfort, as it is drawing many of all ages and fortunes now. And so he was killed in his first fight against the Boers after he had performed an exploit, his first and last in war, which would most certainly have brought him honorable distinction. He had a queer presentiment of impending fate, for he had spoken a good deal to us of the chances of death, and had even selected his own epitaph, so that on the little wooden cross which stands at the foot of Bastion Hill, the hill he himself took and held, there is written, "Is it well with the child? It is well." The coign of vantage, which I found on the side of the hill, was not only to a great extent sheltered from the bullets, but afforded an extensive view of the general action, and for the rest of the day I remained with Lord Dundonald watching its development. But a modern action is very disappointing as a spectacle. There is no smoke except that of the bursting shells. The combatants are scattered, spread over a great expanse of ground, concealed wherever possible, clad in neutral tint. All the pomp and magnificence of Omdurman, the solid lines of infantry, the mighty dervish array, bright with flashing spears and waving flags, were excluded. Rows of tiny dots hurried forward a few yards and vanished into the brown of the earth. Bunches and clusters of brown things huddled among the rocks or in sheltered spots. The 6 batteries of artillery unlimbered, and the horses, hidden in some safe place, were scarcely visible. Once I saw in miniature through glasses a great wave of infantry surge forward along a spur and disappear beyond a crest line. The patter of the Mauser rifles swelled into a continuous rumbling like a train of wagons passing over a pontoon bridge, and presently the wave recoiled. The minute figures that composed it squeezed themselves into cover among some rocks. A great many groups of men began carrying away black objects. A trickle of independent dots dispersed itself. Then we groaned. There had been a check. The distant drama continued. The huddling figures began to move again. Lithe, active forms moved about, rearranging things. Officers, we knew, even at the distance. Then the whole wave started again, full of impetus. Started, went forward, and never came back. And at this we were all delighted, and praised the valor of our unequaled infantry, and wished we were near enough to give them a cheer. So we watched until nightfall, when some companies of the Queen's from General Hildyard's brigade arrived and took over the charge of our hill from us. And we descended to get our horses, and perhaps some food, finding, by good luck, all we wanted, and lay down on the ground to sleep, quite contented with ourselves and the general progress of the army. The action of the 21st had begun before I awoke, and a brisk fusillade was going on all along the line. This day the right attack stood still, or nearly so, and the activity was confined to the left, where General Hildyard, with 5 battalions and 2 batteries, skillfully felt and tested the enemy's positions and found them most unpleasantly strong. The main difficulty was that our guns could not come into action to smash the enemy in his trenches without coming under his rifle fire, because the edge of the plateau was only 1,000 yards from the second and main Boer position, and unless the guns were on the edge of the plateau, they could see very little and do less. The cavalry guarded the left flank passively, and I remember no particular incident, except that our own artillery flung the fragments of 2 premature shells among us and wounded a soldier in the Devonshire regiment. The following fact, however, is instructive. Captain Stewart's squadron of the South African Light Horse dismounted, held an advanced kopje all day long under a heavy fire and never lost a man. 200 yards further back was another kopje held by 2 companies of regular infantry under equal fire. The infantry had more than 20 men hit. On the 22nd, the action languished and the generals consulted. The infantry had made themselves masters of all the edge of the plateau, and the regiments clustered in the steep re-entrance like flies on the side of a wall. The Boers endeavored to reach them with shells, and a desultory musketry duel also proceeded. During the afternoon, I went with Captain Brooke to visit some of the battalions of General Hart's brigade and see what sort of punishment they were receiving. As we rode up the watercourse which marks the bottom of the valley, a shrapnel shell cleared the western crest line and exploded among one of the battalions. At first, it seemed to have done no harm, but as we climbed higher and nearer, we met a stretcher carried by 6 soldiers. On it lay a body with a handkerchief thrown across the face. The soldiers bearing the stretcher were all covered with blood. We proceeded and soon reached the battalions. A company of the Dublin Fusiliers were among those captured in the armored train, and I have the pleasure of knowing most of the officers of this regiment. So we visited them first, a dozen gentlemen, begrimed, unwashed, unshaven, sitting on the hillside behind a 2-foot wall of rough stones and near a wooden box, which they called the officers' mess. They were in capital spirits in spite of every abominable circumstance. What did you lose in the action? Oh, about 50. Poor Hensley was killed, you know. That was the worst of it. Captain Hensley was one of the smallest and bravest men in the army, and the Dublin Fusiliers, who should be good judges, regarded him as their very best officer for all military affairs, whether attack, retreat, or reconnaissance. Each had lost a friend, but collectively as a regiment they had lost a powerful weapon. Very few of us left now, said the colonel, surveying his regiment with pride. How many? About 450. Out of 1,000? Well, out of about 900. This war has fallen heavily on some regiments. Scarcely any has suffered more severely. None has won greater distinction than the Dublin Fusiliers, everywhere at the front. Dundee, Lombard's Kop, Colenso, Chieveley, Colenso again, and even here at Spion Kop. Half the regiment, more than half the officers killed or wounded or prisoners. But the survivors were as cheery as ever. Do these shells catch anyone? Only 2 or 3 an hour. They don't come always. Every half hour we get half a dozen. That last one killed an officer in the next regiment. Rather bad luck, picking an officer out of all these men. Only 1 killed today so far, a dozen wounded. I inquired how much more time remained before the next consignment of shells was due. They said about 10 minutes. I thought that would just suit me and bade them good morning, for I have a horror of being killed when not on duty. But Captain Brooke was anxious to climb to the top and examine the Boer position, and since we had come so far, it was perhaps worthwhile going on. So we did, and with great punctuality the shells arrived. We were talking to the officers of another regiment when they began. 2 came in quick succession over the eastern wall of the valley, and then 1 over the western. All 3 burst, 2 on impact, 1 in the air. A 4th ripped along a stone shelter behind which skirmishers were firing. A 5th missed the valley altogether and screeched away into the plain clear of the hills. The officers and men were quite callous. They scarcely troubled to look up. The soldiers went on smoking or playing cards or sleeping as if nothing had happened. Personally, I felt no inclination to any of these pursuits, and I thought to sit and wait indefinitely, for the caprice of one of these shrieking iron devils would be most trying to anyone. But apparently you can get accustomed to anything. The regiment where the officer had been killed a few minutes before was less cheerful and callous. The little group of officers crouching in the scanty shelter had seen one of their number plucked out of their midst and slain, uselessly as it seemed. They advised us to take cover, which we would gladly have done had there been any worth speaking of. For at this moment the Boers discharged their Vickers Maxim gun, the pom-pom, and I have never heard such an extraordinary noise. 7 or 8 bangs, a rattle, an amazing cluttering and whistling overhead, then the explosions of the little shells, which scarred the opposite hillside in a long row of puffs of brown dust and blue-white smoke, suggesting a lash from a knotted scourge. "Look out," we were told. "They always follow that with a shell." And so they did, but it passed overhead without harming anyone. Again, the Vickers Maxim flung its covey of projectiles. Again we crouched for the following shell, but this time it did not come immediately. I had seen quite enough, however, so we bade our friends good luck, never goodbye on active service, and hurried, slowly, on account of appearances, from this unhealthy valley. As we reached our horses, I saw another shell burst among the infantry. After that, there was another interval. Further on, we met a group of soldiers returning to their regiment. One lad of about 19 was munching a biscuit. His right trouser leg was soaked with blood. I asked whether he was wounded. "No, sir. It's only blood from an officer's head," he answered, and went on eating his biscuit. Such were the fortunes for 4 days of the 2 brigades forming Warren's left attack. I have already written a general account of the final action of Spion Kop on January 24th, and have little to add. As soon as the news spread through the camps that the British troops were occupying the top of the mountain, I hurried to Gun Hill, where the batteries were arrayed, and watched the fight from a flank. The spectacle was inconsiderable, but significant. It was like a shadow peep show. Along the mighty profile of the hill, a fringe of little black crotchets advanced. Then there were brown and red smudges of dust from shells striking the ground, and white puffs from shrapnel bursting in the air, variations from the black and white. Presently, a stretcher borne by 5 tiny figures jerks slowly forward, silhouetted on the skyline. More shells, back goes the stretcher laden, a thicker horizontal line than before. Then, a rush of crotchets rearwards, one leading 2 mules terrified, jibbing, hanging back, all in silhouette one moment, the next all smudged with dust cloud. God help the driver, shadows clear again, driver still dragging mules, no, only 1 mule now, other figures still running rearwards. Suddenly reinforcements arrive, hundreds of them. The whole skyline bristles with crotchets moving swiftly along it, bending forward almost double, as if driving through a hailstorm. Thank heaven for that, only just in time too, and then more smudges on the shadow screen. Sir Charles Warren was standing near me with his staff. One of his officers came up and told me that they had been disturbed at breakfast by a Boer shell which had crashed through their wagon, killing a servant and a horse. Presently, the general himself saw me. I inquired about the situation and learned for the first time of General Woodgate's wound. Death, it was then reported, and that Thornycroft had been appointed brigadier general. We have put what we think is the best fighting man in command, regardless of seniority. We shall support him as he may request. We can do no more. I will only relate one other incident, a miserable one. The day before the attack on Spion Kop, I had chanced to ride across the pontoon bridge. I heard my name called, and saw the cheery face of a boy I had known at Harrow, a smart, clean-looking young gentleman, quite the rough material for a regular horse. He had just arrived and pushed his way to the front, hoped, so he said, to get a job. This morning they told me that an unauthorized press correspondent had been found among the killed on the summit. At least they thought at first it was a press correspondent, for no one seemed to know him. A man had been found leaning forward on his rifle, dead. A broken pair of field glasses, shattered by the same shell that had killed their owner, bore the name Corkadale. The name and the face flew together in my mind. It was the last joined subaltern of Thornycroft's mounted infantry, joined in the evening shot at dawn. Poor gallant young Englishman. He had soon got his job. The great sacrifice had been required of the Queen's latest recruit.
This concludes today's reading of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria, by Winston S. Churchill. Join us also on February 4th for the subsequent chapter. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. Thanks for listening, and so long.